So from the seat in the audience here, I just want to introduce our speaker, Scott MacConomy. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Okay, yeah, Scott's going to talk to us about what we can do about secularism in politics in a nutshell. He's going to talk to us from some of his experience in government and with the Center for Inquiry. And I'm sure that we'll all be very interested in to hear all those things. I'm trying to get an idea here what the focus is going to be. But yeah, it's basically what we can all do, and there's things that we can do to affect the political nature of the country. So I'll send it off to you, Scott. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Great to see everybody. Thanks for coming out this morning. It looks like I'm the only one not wearing a mask, but I guess that's okay. I do like the audience view way we've done this, so I mean I can see everybody. So if you have a question at some point, just raise your hand, and I will. Unless there's somebody way over to the right, I think I will see you. So yeah, questions are welcome. And
Right first. Right, sir.
Yes.
I'll stand in the background and wait for everybody to raise their hand.
Okay. I'll introduce myself real quick. I'm at the Secular Coalition for America. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Government Relations. The Secular Coalition is a coalition of 20 like-minded but all very diverse organizations that are all one way or another interested in the separation of church and state. And we have some large ones. We have the American Humanist Association, we have Freedom from Religion Foundation, American Atheists, and we have some fairly small ones. We have the Clergy Project, which is a group of former clergy who decided they just didn't believe what they'd been selling anymore. So it's a group that helps those guys and women cope with transitioning into a different life. And we have the Secular Student Association, which is not a small one, but it's the groups on campus that are representing secular students. So we have a wide variety. We can. I would encourage you to go to our website at some point and just see who all we have. And there's a description of what everybody does. And that website is secular.org. So with that, I'm going to go to a few slides just to make the early part of the presentation a little more organized. Where am I? All right. Well, I'm sorry. I don't know why the slides aren't there. They were there last night when I just did a quick run through on this. It was just a little more about the Secular Coalition. We represent, as our new slogan says, we protect the equal rights of non-religious Americans. So we recently changed that so it's a little more expansive. Non-religious Americans covers a wider variety than, or is a little less specific and a little more all-encompassing than what we used to say. We do this on Capitol Hill and in the courts. At SCA itself, where I am, we don't have any attorneys, but some of our other groups, Freedom from Religion Foundation and American Atheists, do have attorneys that are taking people to court in on Capitol, well, in the Supreme Court and in the states where a lot of issues come up. So as a coalition, we're active at the federal level, the state level, and in courts at all levels, really. It's everything from somebody's leading, opening a school board meeting with a prayer to filing amicus briefs for Supreme Court cases. So there's a lot going on in the courts right now, and we are active as a coalition in just about every major case going on. And I'll talk a little bit more about those a little bit later. When we say we get the secular message out. What we usually start with is just letting people know who the secular voters are, because most people don't know how many secular voters there are in this country. Recent surveys and accurate surveys show that 29% of the country fall in the category of the nones, which is people who are either atheists or agnostics, or when asked what their religion is, they basically just say, I have none. So we call them the nones. I hope I'm probably telling everybody something they've already heard, but we officially there's 29%. So we usually just round that up to 30% and say, you may not know this, but 30% of voters nationally have no religious affiliation. And that always gets people's attention on Capitol Hill, because it's just not that widely known. There's a study from the Pew Foundation that has been just updated last year, but they're a widely respected think tank, and that's what they've come up with. So part of our job is just education, letting people know there are this many people out there that aren't going to church every Sunday. And in fact, there are more people, let's see if I can get this right. There are now more people that never go to church than there are that go to church every Sunday. That was something that I just read recently. So, and the numbers are even greater in young people. So demographically, this is a trend that's not going away, and it'll be that 30% number will go up a little every time there's a new survey, because it's strongest among 18 to 36-year-olds, I guess, is the demographic group that usually gets surveyed and turns out the best for us. So part of what we do is, like I said, just education, letting people know there are people out there who will support you when you vote for secular issues. And we encourage everyone to vote accordingly, and I can talk a little more about that later. In Congress, there is exactly one member who is publicly and unapologetically a secularist. He's identified himself a couple of ways. It's Congressman Huffman from California. So that 30% is definitely not represented in Congress. He's one out of 435 who publicly don't identify with any religion. Now, we sort of know there are other members who pretty much feel the same way, but they're just scared to say so because they assume that'll be a problem next time they're up for re-election. But we do kind of know which members are on our team and which ones will help us when we go to them, but they're just not terribly open about it. The next thing on the list of things we're talking about today is what are the issues in Washington? Because that's what I work on mostly at Secular Coalition or at SCA. We focus on the federal issues. Like I said, some of the other bigger groups focus on the state issues. And my job is largely just to kind of coordinate all 20 of our groups when there are things that we all agree on and things we all want to take action on. If we want to send a letter to everybody in the Senate on a particular bill, I will write that up and let everybody get their 2 cents in and get that letter out, for example. So my specific job is kind of coordinator of the other groups, and the larger groups also have people in Washington, lobbyists, for lack of a better word. So I work with them, and some of our smaller groups, it's just 1 or 2 people running the whole organization. They don't have somebody who can really focus on government affairs. So they're generally happy to have us filling that role for them. We have 4 or 5 bills, I guess, in Congress that are particular interest to us right now. One that we just started doing meetings with congressional offices about is one that the Freedom from Religion Foundation supports more than anyone else, but we all get behind it. And that's a bill to put a statue of Thomas Paine somewhere in Washington, because there is no statue of him in Washington, and he was sort of a founding thinker. He doesn't really get listed in the founding fathers, but as a founding thinker, he wrote things like Common Sense that were hugely influential back in the American Revolution. So, and he, and some of his later writings, was strongly in favor of separation of church and state as sort of a model for what representative government should look like. This is back when, this was a new idea. After our revolution, he went to France and helped with their revolution and wrote. He was appointed as a foreigner to help write the Constitution for the new French government. So anyway, Thomas Paine, very important guy and early champion of separation of church and state. He had seen what the Church of England was like in England when he lived there. And so we're doing meetings with members of Congress trying to get support for the statue. The money has all been raised for it, which is unusual. Normally, when people are trying to get a statue or a monument in Washington, they want some federal money, but the money's been raised privately. So we're trying to get a statue of Thomas Paine just approved, and then pick a location somewhere on the federal property in Washington. A second bill we're pushing is called the Do No Harm Act. This is a bill that clarifies the intent, the original intent of RFRA, which is a bill that was passed 20 years ago, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was supposed to make sure I have found it's a complicated bill to try and explain. RFRA was supposed to sort of ensure that religious rights and the rights of the non-religious were not infringed on, but the wording has been construed in some recent court cases to basically do the opposite of that. So there's a bill now called the Do No Harm Act, which spells out what the Religious Freedom Restoration Act is supposed to be used as in court. For example, the Hobby Lobby decision a few years ago on Hobby Lobby company did not have to provide contraception, even though under Obamacare there was a requirement that it and other companies like it provide that for that in their insurance policies. So, and they based it on the company's religious objections to that. So RFRA is designed to tell the courts, no, you can't rule that way, the way you did in the Hobby Lobby decision or in other court cases that are looking at religious freedom. We've got over 200 co-sponsors in the House and over 30 co-sponsors in the Senate. In the Senate, you've got to have 60 votes to get anything passed these days. You've probably heard about the debate over should the Democrats keep the filibuster or not. So it's a heavy lift in the Senate, finding 10 Republicans that are willing to go along with the language in the Do No Harm Act, but that's what we're working on. We have enough people in the House we have enough supporters to pass it there. It's a matter of just getting that through right now, and we're working hard on that. So Religious Freedom Restoration Act is something we're definitely supporting. We're also asking for money in the annual appropriations bill for two purposes. One is better enforcement of the Johnson Amendment, which is the language that says churches and other faith-based institutions are not allowed to endorse political candidates as part of their normal religious activities. There are things you can do in a church or a synagogue or whatever. You can educate people, you can encourage them to vote. You can even have a candidate debate as long as it's very bipartisan and everyone's invited and it's even-handed, but you just can't endorse any candidates or oppose any candidates officially. as a church or as any nonprofit. Churches are lumped in with all other nonprofits in this under the Johnson Amendment, which was originally designed by then Senator Lyndon Johnson to crack down on some nonprofits that were campaigning against him. It wasn't even originally about churches. It was just some other political-oriented nonprofits that were causing him problems. So anyway, we've asked when the annual appropriations bill for the IRS comes out, we've asked that there be language and money in there for the IRS to better enforce the Johnson Amendment, because right now they basically almost turn a blind eye to everything. There are a few examples of them actually enforcing the most blatant examples or the most high profile examples, but almost any church can get away with it. And there's even a day every year when a lot of churches blatantly violate the Johnson Amendment, so that apparently just because they know they can, or maybe they're hoping that this will end up in court because there are people who could make a case that, well, this is a freedom of religion issue and the government can't tell a pastor what he can say in a church service. But there are other court precedents that disagree with that interpretation. So anyway, we've asked for more money for the Johnson Amendment enforcement, and we've also asked for money to investigate white Christian nationalism. There hasn't been a thorough investigation specifically about that threat, both as it was pretty apparent on January 6th and as sort of an overall growing threat to democracy, really, because it gives permission to people to violate laws that affect elections and affect a lot of things just because they think, well, there's a higher power telling me to do that. So we're concerned about Christian nationalism, and we've asked the Justice Department to do a better job of enforcing that and asked for some money in their budget specifically to look at white Christian nationalism. Other issues come up from time to time. One of the House members introduced a bill to establish a national hymn. We didn't see any real need to have a national hymn. And then there's the question of, well, if you had one, which one would you pick? Which God would be referenced in there? It just seemed like a bad idea. So we've lobbied against that bill in the House, and so far it hasn't gotten to the House floor for a vote yet. It was introduced by Congressman Clyburn, who's a fairly prominent Democrat, so he has some clout, and we're hoping we can keep that from advancing anywhere in the House. There's just no need for that. There's also the question of, well, we have a national anthem. When would we need a national hymn? It just seemed irrelevant and getting a little too close to the government establishing religion in a small but significant way. And there are other things that come up. I ran across a visa program that's basically a carve out in the government immigration program for ministers and people who will come here to work specifically at a faith-based institution. I think it's for 2 years. And number one, the immigration system's complicated enough. I didn't see any need for a specific carve out for religious leaders and faith-based workers. I mean, Catholic Charities doesn't need people coming here from some other country to do what they do. Not that a lot of things they do aren't worthwhile, but that just seemed kind of pointless. And then I did a little research and I discovered that a few years ago, somebody had looked into it and found that the Scientologists were using this visa program to bring several hundred people a year to this country, and they would end up just working in the Scientology housekeeping area in some of the Scientology buildings, or they'd end up as janitors in Scientology facilities, which pretty clearly is not what this program was designed for in the first place. So We have a Freedom of Information Act request that we've just sent out to find out more about the program, because there's very little that the Immigration Service puts out publicly about who's involved, what religions are involved, and what enforcement there is on people actually doing what they're supposed to be doing once they get here. So that's an overview of the kind of things we do at SCA. Once in a while, it's just me. I'm basically the only one working on this last one, the immigration one. But most of the time, it's several of our groups working together. We have a monthly call where we talk about what we're doing, what needs to be done, and we get together more frequently. So SCA is a really important coalition for advancing or for protecting the equal rights of the non-religious Americans. That's our new logo, and I think it's a good one. We actually put quite a bit of thought into that, and we had several more complicated ones, but we ended up just with that as our new slogan. I was going to talk a little, because you have some really important races going on in Pennsylvania this year, about how to be an effective advocate, both in just talking to candidates. I know the candidates are always pretty busy, but Jim Palmquist is good at getting in touch with people and getting meetings and letting people know about secular issues and the secular movement and the secular population. So I just wanted to talk a little about how to have a constructive meeting with a member of Congress or a state legislator or their staff. Most of the time you end up with staff, but not always. And that way, if anyone is interested and able to get involved in local campaigns this coming year, hopefully that gives you a little background on how to do that. To start with, everywhere has a local, I should mention, SCA is a bipartisan organization. We're officially bipartisan, nonpartisan. We do end up finding the Democrats generally favor the issues that we favor, but we lobby both sides of the aisle in Congress, and there's no reason not to try to talk to both candidates in a race, because one of them's going to win, and you hope both of them will be, or either of them, whoever wins, will be sympathetic or at least better informed about secular issues if you can meet with them or their staff. So the first thing to keep in mind is if you're talking to a candidate or a elected official, they don't expect you to be an expert on any of the issues or how a bill becomes law or the intricacies of legislation. They just expect you to present how a bill affects you as a secular American or your family or your community, the secular community. They just want to hear it sort of from your perspective. That's why they've probably agreed to meet with you in the first place. So don't ever think, well, there's no way I could go in and explain why the Do No Harm Act is important. They don't expect you to know all the details. They expect me to know all the details, but everyone should feel perfectly free to talk to your elected officials anytime you can about issues, because if they're good officials, they want to hear from constituents. They want to hear different points of view, and you're certainly good representatives of the secular viewpoint on things and separation of church and state, let me back up a little, since I didn't really talk about the court cases. Separation of church and state is, I will say, under some threat in the Supreme Court these days. There's number one, the case that would potentially overturn Roe v. Wade. It's not, the arguments on the surface are not based on religion, but when basically 6 of the 9 justices are Catholic, and that's the only kind of judge who's been appointed by Republicans for quite a while. It's not too hard to connect the dots and say the Catholic teachings they grew up with are affecting their point of view on this issue. And I should mention one of them was appointed by a Democrat, Justice Sotomayor, and she sees things differently than the other 5 Catholic justices, but nonetheless, it's very easy to connect the dots and say, well, their religious beliefs are affecting their outlook on the Roe v. Wade debate. There are 2 other cases right now that are even more directly religious freedom oriented. One is a case about a football coach in Washington State. Has anyone heard about this one? The football coach in Bremerton? Okay. He just briefly started going out to the 50-yard line after the games and saying a prayer, and pretty soon a decent number of players came out and joined him, and the school said, you can't do this. The school is aware of the fact that they're not allowed to condone religious behavior like this, public endorsement of prayer for any particular religion. So the school board basically said, you can't do this. He kept doing it. There's some dispute about whether he was fired or just didn't reapply when his contract was up. He was a part-time coach. He was making $5,000 a year. So anyway, he ended up not coming back for the season about 6 years ago. And then he went to court and said, I've been discriminated against based on my religious beliefs. And the first 2 rounds in court, the district court and the appeals court, completely voted against him, but he appealed to the Supreme Court and they took the case up, also in spite of the fact that he now lives in Florida, and the chances he's actually going to go back and retake his old job if he wins in the Supreme Court seem pretty remote to get his $5,000 a year job back. And this is basically legally an employment discrimination case. It's what was he fired and what reasons were given at the time he was fired, if he was. But it does have much bigger implications for school prayer. So we and several of our other coalition members filed an amicus brief on behalf of the school district saying the Constitution really makes it clear that a public employee, like a football coach, can't just lead students in prayer. And we will find out very soon what the Supreme Court decides about this. And again, if everyone tries to figure out how it's going to happen, what's going to happen based on the questions when they do the oral arguments, which were a couple months ago, and based on the oral arguments, it's not impossible he's going to win. So we're hoping that one turns out on our side, because it could be a very narrow ruling. This guy was fired inappropriately. He should be allowed to lead football players in a prayer, or it could be a much broader ruling. That's sort of what was the big question with the Supreme Court. How broad will the ruling be in various cases where you lose? And the other one that could have big implications on church-state separation is a case in Maine, where in the very rural areas, they don't actually have school districts. So the government gives families money to pay for them to go to public or private schools that are somewhere in the area. And this case revolves around whether the families can take that taxpayer money and go to a religious school where the money will be used basically to teach religion. There's already been a court case a few years ago that said in a different state, you can take state money and pay for a kid to go to a religious school if the religious school isn't overtly teaching religion, to simple it up a lot. In Maine, the question becomes, well, can taxpayer money go to any type of church school, no matter how religious they are and what they use that taxpayer money for? So that's a big threat to keeping taxpayer money away from church schools around the country. And again, it'll be a question of how broad a ruling does the Supreme Court come up with. So those are the biggest court cases that will be decided really probably in sometime this month. Maybe it might get into July, but we'll see what happens with those. So back to how can you be an effective advocate? Number one, nobody expects you to be really well informed about the entire legislative process, just your take on a bill. Number two, if you're talking to a candidate, hopefully there are some candidate forums where they actually take questions, although those are getting rarer and rarer. You can ask something as simple as, what is your position on religious freedom? Because that phrase has developed almost two different meanings now. One is religious freedom means the government can't tell me that I have to belong to a church. The government can't inject itself into religion. And the other meaning has become, if my religion says I'm allowed to discriminate against someone, the government can't stop me from doing that. So asking, what is your opinion on religious freedom, would get an interesting answer, I'm sure, from any of the candidates. Other questions you can ask could be more specific. You could ask them what they think about the Supreme Court cases, because these are definitely high profile decisions coming down the line. You can just ask, what is their interpretation of the religious freedom section of the First Amendment? That's another way to just get some idea if candidates have even really thought about this, and if they have, what are their opinions? If you're talking to someone about a specific bill, it could be something in the state legislature, and you go talk to someone in Harrisburg or at their district offices. Just about every legislator has someone locally who will be happy to meet with you. So that's their job, is to meet with constituents. It's helpful to have a little background, have something sort of written up to clarify what you're asking, and if it's a bill, you want to be specific about what the bill is and whether you are for it or against it. Sometimes you're asking somebody to introduce a bill if there's something that needs to be fixed and there's nothing out there fixing it. So it's helpful to be specific about what you're asking for, and it's helpful to show as many people as possible that are on your side, even if they're not there. If you can get letters from groups that support you and whatever you're asking for, that's a big help. It's also sort of reassuring to legislators if they have a letter saying, please do this, because then in their next campaign, if somebody says, well, why did you support that bill? They can say, well, here are the people who asked me to do that. So getting some type of support letter or something like that from interested groups is always helpful. And I should mention right now that we have a fairly extensive document called our legislative toolkit, which I put in the chat, which I realize isn't something people sitting there in chairs are going to be able to just cut and paste. But if you go to secular.org and look in the government affairs section, you can find our toolkit for talking to members of Congress and state legislators, and it has a lot of tips on the kind of thing I'm talking about, how to present your issue at a meeting, what's a good way to follow up once you're done, things like that. So if you get a chance and you need to, we do have what I think is a fairly comprehensive toolkit for you. We also, sorry, time for coffee. We also encourage people to ask your members of Congress to join the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, which is a group founded by Congressman Huffman. The one person, one member of Congress will just identify as a non-theist or a secularist. He does vary how he says it. And Congressman Jamie Raskin co-founded the Free Thought Caucus with him 4 years ago, and it's up to 15 members, and they are sort of our go-to allies in the House on secular issues, and they're a good group. It's growing. We got 3 new members just this year. You can see who the members are on our page. We have a special page on our website dedicated to the Free Thought Caucus. So their stated purpose is to advocate for bills that support separation of church and state and are also science related. They support the use of science in writing and passing legislation and developing and analyzing legislation, because that's not always a priority. There's a bill called the Scientific Integrity Act, which has been around for 2 Congresses now, which would prevent political officials from either delaying or changing the results of studies that federal agency scientists come up with. We found under the last administration, there was an egregious amount of covering up of climate studies and various other, all kinds of scientific work the government was doing. So the Scientific Integrity Act is something the Free Thought Caucus has been supporting, and we're hoping we can help get that passed this year. It gives agency scientists an appeal process they can go through if they think somebody is quashing their work, and it also will basically make it illegal for political appointees to change scientific work that the scientists have done. So the Free Thought Caucus, back to that, is a valuable group. We try and, whenever we meet with other members of Congress, we mention it and say it would be great if you could join this group. And like I said, we've gotten 3 new members this year, so we're optimistic that we can keep that going. Although one of our recent members, we were really happy when Congresswoman Maloney from New York joined, because she's a senior Democrat. She's been in Congress for 30 years. And then a couple of weeks ago, it's a long story, but the New York redistricting process finally came to a conclusion with an objective guy who works at Carnegie Mellon drawing the map for the state, and he pit her and Congressman Nadler, who's also been there for 30 years and is also a powerful committee chairman in the same district in Manhattan. I guess we want Congresswoman Maloney to win out because she's a Free Thought Caucus member, and we like to keep them around. But that's, I worked for Senator Moynihan for a long time, so I probably pay more attention to New York politics than most people, and to seeing those 2 longtime New York congressional titans thrown in the same district and running against each other with very low, basically no notice. They had like 6 weeks between here's the new map and here's the primary election. So anyway, Congresswoman Maloney, we hope wins that race. And I also want to talk a little bit about the Pennsylvania races, because I can't think of a state where there have been more interesting races than you guys have. Slightly less interesting now that Dr. Oz is the official candidate, but I have, as someone who did work in the Senate, the celebrity candidates just really bother me. Herschel Walker in Georgia is the one bothering me the most. But anytime somebody just decides, well, I'm popular, so I should run for Congress, there's just so many complicated issues and questions that you have to answer, and I really think it's something where on-the-job training just isn't appropriate. But anyway, you got Dr. Oz, and you got Fetterman, who hopefully is going to get back on the campaign trail in the near future. I think he'd be he's got background in government. That's sort of like step one. I just don't understand the thinking that goes, well, my refrigerator's not working. Get me anybody but a refrigerator repairman. They'll know what to do. So I'm hoping Fetterman wins just based on the competency issue. As far as church-state separation, if Dr. Oz wins, it might be interesting to see where he comes down on that. It would be great to get someone to ask him about it on the campaign trail. His background is different than most candidates, so hopefully if he wins, he's a little more open-minded than your average Republican is these days. And then Mastriano is the poster boy for a white Christian nationalist running for office. So I'm hoping that's a problem for enough people that he doesn't win, even though he's probably got a electoral advantage going in, just looking at the numbers. But it's a long way to election day for that one. So I really hope he's going to screw up enough that enough moderates decide we're just not ready for someone like him. And it would be interesting to talk to someone on his campaign or him and ask him, why are you such a white Christian nationalist? Why do you really believe this nation is supposed to be founded on biblical principles and the white Christian nationalist creed? So if anyone gets a chance, I'm guessing there aren't going to be very many unscripted opportunities where he's just taking questions at a town hall meeting or something like that. But it would be great to bring that up at some point. Or he'll do some interviews, not all of them on Fox, and hopefully a reporter will ask him about that, because that's certainly a high-profile part of his campaign, and one that he should have to answer for. So it's gotten to be 11:47, and nobody's raised a hand. Does anybody have a question at this point? Yes, gentleman in the orange.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to ask if you have done anything to question the Catholic Supreme Court justices to recuse themselves in light of Biden and Pelosi being denied sacraments by the church. Is there some conflict of interest, personal conflict of interest in their deciding on Roe versus Wade?
We haven't asked them to recuse themselves, but I know there are other groups, the more formal anti-abortion groups did do that early on in the process. And they all basically said, no, we'll be fine. We'll be objective. So on the abortion issue, it's kind of not really in our lane as the people advocating for secular government. When it's clear in maybe in a state bill that the people supporting the bill are saying basically, this is a religious issue, then we get involved, or one of our groups will get involved. At the Supreme Court level, there is actually, we have just started supporting in meetings with members in the House, a bill to establish a Supreme Court ethics code, which does not exist now. So in lieu of them actually recusing themselves on this issue, we are trying to get supporters for the Supreme Court ethics bill that's been introduced basically just since it turned out Clarence Thomas's wife is helping to try to overthrow the government. And he didn't even mention this, let alone recuse himself in cases directly involving that issue. So we're working on a Supreme Court Code of Ethics, which we hope is another thing we can get passed this year. We just was introduced a few weeks ago, and we're just now trying to help round up sponsors.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I have a question or a comment. It concerns me that the church-state separation issue in the federal government is being focused very much on the Catholicism of the Supreme Court, which is certainly important. But I think particularly in the states, it doesn't really focus on Catholicism. If it's a church-state separation issue across the board, federally and in the states, many religions, if not most, would focus on being anti-abortion if you pinned them down. And I think even some of the people that you describe as nuns don't affiliate with any religion, have a vague sort of religious belief that life is sacred, that there's a God, that there's a heaven, that there's, they do have religious beliefs, that they don't, that they don't have a church or something. That's
right.
And I think this is very important. I think that there's a lot of people that are essentially getting religion shoved down their throats in a very sort of non-focused way that don't even really realize what's happening here. And I don't hear any real way that you have or anybody I've seen has of addressing that at all. Do you have any comment on that?
Yes, you're right. There are a significant number of people that will say, well, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And those are people in the 29% of people that get categorized in surveys as the nuns. So we do keep in mind, they're not all completely atheists or agnostics. There are some people who just don't affiliate with a specific church. And that's
the whole issue of abortion not being made into a church-state separation issue per se.
Yeah, you're right. If you read the draft opinion that was leaked, it's not, there's not really any specific religious background in there, as a justification for what the conservative justices have come up with. And you're right, there are definitely people on both sides of the issue there are people who aren't religious, but are also opposed to abortion. And it's important to keep those people in mind. But if you read some of the earlier writings of the justices before they got on the court, Justice Barrett and Kavanaugh, it was pretty clear at that point there were religious teachings motivating them on some other decisions that they made. So yes, we're inferring a lot when we say that the Catholic justices are using that as their legal motivation. You can definitely make an argument for overturning Roe v. Wade that's not based on religion, but it seems like the supporters of that are
argument for keeping it that it's not based on religion, but it is based on religion. or very, very much based on religion, perhaps not totally. And particularly with reference to the states, where you've got a lot of activity going on. I don't see that point at all being made. I don't know that that's your particular focus, but maybe some a little more beyond that.
Well, when Texas passed its ban several months ago now, the one that says, the one that offers a bounty for people to turn in people that are aiding and abetting in an abortion, the people who wrote that bill were pretty blatant about it being religiously motivated. So you're right, it's not always, or to a large extent across the country in the conservative states, they're not Catholic, they're evangelical, or even it can even be some of the nuns. They don't go to church regularly, but they feel a religious direction to offer bills like abortion and other things, some of the hot button issues. And it's tough. Like you said, there's no easy solution other than finding candidates that are more rationally motivated, even if they're not going to vote the way you want. It would be nice for them to at least be basing their decisions more on things other than what's pretty clearly a religious background.
Well, thanks for everything you're doing.
Well,
We appreciate it.
was that everybody? Young man down in front.
Yeah, Jim Palmquist, for what it's worth. Let's see. In terms of the Free Thought Caucus, there are a lot of caucuses in Congress that focus on all kinds of things. And this is a great group because this is the first secular focused caucus. And our rep, Susan Wild, is one of the early members of it. So she is in the line there very well. And the other thing is, it's true that the governor is a Democrat, and we normally flip parties in the governorship. But Josh Shapiro is a pretty competitive guy, pretty bright campaigner, a good fundraiser, and he's been running for about 2 years. And if he doesn't get swept up in a Republican rout, he still could beat the Republican candidate. In 2017, Paul Ryan and Dave Metzler and Jason Brocious and a couple more of us went out and visited Susan Wild and Nostine and stuff, just to tell them that there's a secular voting bloc in this area. And it was an easy visit because we weren't asking them to vote on any particular bill. They were just candidates. But I think we really put a stake in the ground to say we are secular. And I'll just make a guess. Maybe that's why Susan Wild felt comfortable enough to join the Free Thought Caucus when we told her that 25% of the population is secular. Paul and I remember, you probably remember, Paul, she has a Jewish background and I think a Mennonite background, and she's got quite an interesting religious background for what it's worth. But I'm proposing we do that for our Senate campaigns, for Oz, for Fetterman, and maybe even a couple more, the Independent, maybe the Libertarian, like we did in 2017. And again, it's not really a lobbying call where we're asking them to vote anyway, but just to make sure the stake is in the ground that there are secular people in this state, that we do have issues, we do have agenda. And I invite any of you who want to be involved in that over the next month or two. Scott's going to help us develop our program. And I've got a draft already, haven't run by Scott, but it'll be a good opportunity to advance our message. And I'd like to do it earlier in the campaign rather than later. And I think it'll be a positive experience. Like I think Paul would agree, we had a good time visiting with Susan Wild and the various other people we visited with. So if you're interested in that, let me know. Next month, I just want to give you a publicity for next month. I'm going to be speaking about humanism. And I'm not an expert at humanism. I'm going to try and lead a discussion. I've got some content I want to deliver, but I also want to make a discussion and see what everyone else thinks. And we'll talk about definitions of terms, and we'll talk about a vision for our organization here in the Lehigh Valley. We'll talk about the big nonprofits that Scott's involved with in this business, so you have a broader background of who Freedom from Religion Foundation, American Humanist Association are, and that kind of thing. And I'll also give a report. I attended the FFRF, Freedom from Religion Foundation's convention last year. So it's going to be a good program. And I think it's going to be an opportunity for each of you to bring your own ideas too, as to what you'd like to see us work on. That's all I have.
And whatever you did, Jim, with Susan Wild, it must have worked, because the last tabling event we had, she sought us out. And she came up and had a nice conversation with the people from LVH that were there, and more or less offered her support and thanks. So
That was a great conversation. I thought. Easy sell. We were asking her to vote anyway. It was an easy sell. We didn't ask her to vote anyway, but just told her that we're out here and what we like and what we don't like.
which I think goes to Scott's point, just putting ourselves out there and saying, we're here, we're paying attention.
I think it was a worthwhile effort because it allowed us as the people who were going out to present the position to look at I think we had 3 candidates at that time. And it was obvious to me, if I didn't have a decision going in, which one of the 3 I would have chosen. So it was good on that respect.
I just wanted to mention that when we do get new members of the Free Thought Caucus, we try and find out, well, how did that happen? And for 2 of them that joined this year, it was just, well, somebody in the district asked them about it. Some like 1 or 2 people brought it to their attention. So if they're sort of pre-inclined to do something like that, sometimes it's just letting them know it's there. You're right. There are many caucuses in the House, and that's why we always try and point it out. But if you guys have a chance to talk to someone other than Susan Wild, just let them know, because we never know when 1 or 2 people pointing it out will make a big difference. And with that, I think I'm going to go. My wife's got something scheduled for the middle of the day. So it's been great. I appreciate everybody's time and attention and questions. And yeah, I'm working with Jim, and hopefully everybody can do something on these campaigns. I think I started saying at the very beginning, I'm sure there's a Democratic or a Republican club of some type wherever you live in the area, and usually it costs nothing to join, and it's a good way to get to know your elected officials, because if you're I'm in the Alexandria Democratic Committee here, which isn't really a committee, it's like 200 people, so it's not a good name. But the state senators will come by to the monthly meeting, and our congressman once in a while, and Senator Warner once in a while. So if you join the local group, they'll help you go campaign, knock on doors for people, and it's a good way to get to know the local issues and the local legislators.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Thanks, everybody.
Could you mention the website one more time so we can all go home and
It's just secular.org. And then there's a government affairs tab, and you can find our action alerts on different issues. And you can also find the Free Thought Caucus page there. So yeah, just secular.org and look around.
thank you so much.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, everybody.
Real quick before you go, Scott, how do you like this hybrid view here? Did this work out all right?
This is great. Yeah, it's much better than just having a bunch of faces on the screen, and I like it. So keep it up when you're doing things like this.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good day.